From downtown Milwaukee, welcome to Money Talk with Bob Landis. Each week, professional advisors from Landis & Company Investments discuss the latest financial developments, offering timely insight and long-term perspective.
This is Money Talk for May 10th, 2024. Checking the calendar, it's Mother's Day weekend, so of course you're taking Mom out to brunch or to a nice dinner. But if you're looking for something a little different, your Milwaukee Brewers are in town for the weekend. Hey, it's just a thought. You know, when you think of good food in New Orleans, places like Brennan's or Antoine's come to mind. A lesser-known restaurant is the Audubon Insectarium. This season, cicadas are making a special appearance on the menu. Plus, Insectarium is also offering cinnamon bug crunch, chili fried waxworms, and crispy Cajun crickets. But I think Mom would prefer Antoine's. The next one is just kind of a strange story. Some of the MAGA crowd have taken to wearing diapers at Trump rallies, and they're selling them along with T-shirts that say "Diapers over Dems" and hats that say "Real men wear diapers." Political fundraising is a strange business. Shirley Noble is 78 years old and the longtime receptionist at a senior living center in Georgia. She unfortunately needed to spend 4 days in the hospital, but when she returned to work, she discovered the center had hired, wait for it, a younger replacement. Just last month, she was Employee of the Year, and now she's out. Well, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission sued her former employer, and Shirley just went to the bank $78,000 richer. Our lesson of the day is never PO a senior citizen. And finally, speaking of seniors, it was on this day in 2016, an East Indian fertility clinic announced that a 70-year-old woman had given birth to a baby boy. Her son would be 8 years old now, and I bet he'd love to take Mom to the Insectarium for brunch. On the podcast today, we have Dave Sandstrom, Mike Helsel, Joel Dresang, and wrapping up the week, here's Kyle Teding.
Well, thanks, Max, and plenty of good options for Mother's Day. A good start to the month of May. NASDAQ up 1.1% this week, closing at 16,341. The S&P 500 up 1.9%, closing at 5223. And the Dow on a bit of a tear recently, positive every day in the month of May so far, adding 125 points Friday to close at 39,513, up 2.2% for the week. For the year, the Dow still only up 5.5%, although a pretty stellar 5.5%. The S&P up 10, NASDAQ up 9.1%. Quick look at the week. Dave, I think the standout for May so far, the strong returns of the Dow, the strong returns of stocks more broadly after what was a bit of a choppy month of April. You know, I think we got a lot of questions from clients coming through that, you know, small sell-off small sell-off in April about, you know, what should we really expect from stocks with forward P ratios north of 20, approaching 21 at times. You know, how do you really navigate a market in which valuations are as stretched as they are? And I think a lot of answers to that question, but I suspect you're getting it quite a bit.
Yeah, sure, Kyle. Anytime we get to these record highs, sometimes people start looking over their shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop, so to speak. And just because valuations are at these levels doesn't always guarantee that there's a negative thing that's going to happen to bring those PEs back into range. That is certainly an option, unfortunately, but it also means, or could mean, that long-term earnings growth brings that PE back into range, and it also could mean that stocks kind of slow down on pricing and kind of basically wait for those earnings to accumulate. So it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to be looking for that next negative thing to occur. We often say when at market bottoms that sometimes stocks are cheap for a reason. Well, sometimes they're expensive for a reason, and that could be that right now earnings are very strong. We're looking at some really good strong net profits. And margins are expanding. So there's good reasons for those accelerated and elevated valuations right now.
Yeah, I read an article in Barron's this week, and there was a quote from a market strategist out there that talked about a correction through time and not price. And this idea that, if you take a market that's a little expensive, the way you get back to average isn't just by cutting the price by 10% over the span of a day or two. It's by allowing the earnings to catch up. And that's particularly relevant when you consider we went through a stretch last year where earnings growth basically disappeared. And now the expectations are for a bit of a reacceleration. We saw that in first quarter earnings, which we're kind of reaching the tail end of. And most importantly, I think, as you look at, to your point, the profit margin piece of the conversation, well, maybe it isn't just that a correction is needed. Maybe it's that average has shifted a little bit. Maybe we should be willing to pay a little more than we used to pay for stocks, in part because expectations for interest rates maybe support a higher multiple, but also in part because the businesses we're buying are now much more profitable businesses. They have the opportunity to buy growth in ways that maybe historically we didn't see in S&P-like businesses. And so I'm thinking of, the Apples and the Microsofts of the world that are sitting on piles of cash and are going to be building these massive data centers here in Mount Pleasant, which we had a presidential visit this week. That's a revenue source long-term that we weren't even considering maybe 5 years ago. And it's not like Microsoft has to borrow a ton of money to build it. They can spend the cash they have. And I think if we're talking about what's the opportunity set look like, I'm pretty encouraged. It might mean that maybe we have to trade sideways for a little while, but it also might mean that maybe we, to your point, just need that revenue growth, that earnings to catch up. Joel, it was a quiet week overall for economic data. We did get a pretty meaningful report on Friday on consumer sentiment. Maybe some signs that consumers just continue to feel kind of poor about the current state.
Yeah, I always say about consumers is that they're fickle. So, you don't put too much into it, but you also have to remember that consumers propel 2/3 of the economy. So their spending is important, and how they feel about spending is important. So we got this report, and it's a preliminary look at the University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Survey. And what it found was that consumer sentiment overall, broadly based, dropped 13% from where it was at the end of April. It's still up 14% from where it was a year ago, but that drop was significant. And the other thing that's interesting to me about it is that 3 months ago, analysts at the University of Michigan said, don't expect sentiment to change much until after the election. So they were saying, more than 6 months, you're just going to see sort of steady stuff. And it was pretty steady for 3 months, and now all of a sudden it dropped. And you have to wonder, what exactly caused that, and to the surprise of the analysts at the University of Michigan. And they said that a lot of the feedback they were getting from consumers is that they're more concerned about things like inflation, unemployment, and interest rates.
Yeah, Mike, I know you have a lot of these conversations with clients, and we always try to shy away from anecdote when when there's better data out there. I think it's interesting, though, how many of maybe my conversations, I'm sure yours as well, echo some of what we're hearing from, this particular survey.
It is really fascinating to me, the conversations I have regarding this. You have people come in, and some of the first questions is, how much money have I lost? Do I have to go back to work? And I just look at them, and then I put the data in front of them. Like, no, you guys are up for the year. You look at the past almost 18 months now, you're doing great. But when you hear people talk about what's going on, I understand why consumer sentiment is down, right? You have, and it's not necessarily economic data. I don't want to get all, too vibey here, but the bottom line is, what people are talking to me about is you see on the news kind of the world on fire a little bit, right? You've got what's going on in Gaza and Ukraine, and then you see all these the protests on campuses all across the country here, and that just kind of skews people a little bit of how things economically are going, right? And then on top of that, again, not getting political here, but we are in a presidential election year, and those ads are ramping up. And let's be honest, those ads aren't usually filled with positivity and joy, right? It's all like, if you don't vote for me, the world itself is going to end. And some people really absorb that a lot. When they don't necessarily see that we've been under 4% unemployment in this country for going on almost, I think, 2 years now. Wages have never been higher. While Q1 GDP was down, you look Q3 and Q4 of last year were great, and the Atlanta GDP now is predicting it could be 4% for Q2. So it's just kind of interesting that I think a lot of people are taking non-economic indicators just in their life in general and applying it to the economy now. And then that's why you're getting a lot of people saying, oh, the economy sucks, inflation's going back up, I'm losing money, I'm not going to have to get another job again, when quite honestly, while it's not perfect, it's kind of the opposite of what's happening.
Mike, it'd be interesting to take a look at clients who aren't watching the news much or aren't paying attention.
They're much happier.
Well, yeah, you'd think that, and remember that, a lot of what the news media do are they try to reflect things that aren't going the way they should. Yeah. Right? Because that's what's news. We expect things to go right. And when they don't go right, that's what's reported. So if you're, consuming all that, everything looks like it's going bad.
I tell clients all the time, I go, remember, when you're watching the news, whether it's the news or Bloomberg or Fox Business or CNBC, just remember, and I said it before, it is a TV show. If the anchor comes on at the top of the hour and goes, hey, everything's great, here's a picture of a puppy, you're probably going to turn the station because you're not, okay, while that puppy's cute, it's not necessarily going to hold your attention, right? Where if they've got the big headlines splashed across in red lights, unrest on campuses, the world is on fire, you're going to die if you don't stay past the commercial, you're going to stay past the commercial, and all of a sudden now you're just flooded with, oh my God, this is the worst time in the world.
Well, Joel, you can probably correct me if I'm wrong on this, but this theme has been fairly consistent, I think, since the pandemic, where we've had this disconnect between these sentiment surveys and consumer spending. Typically, it used to be where people felt really bad in these surveys, they reflected that with their spending. And recently, it's been more, I feel really bad about the future, but I just put in a new kitchen and I bought a new boat. And we're taking the kids to Disney next week. So there's been a very strange, I think, change in some of the
there's a parallel with there's been long studies of in politics of people being critical of Congress but liking their own representative. Yeah. So it's how they feel and what they do are two different things.
Vote all the bums out, but not my bum.
Well, forgetting that they're all part of the same family, part of the same tribe. Yeah. Joel, you sent a pretty interesting quote as an email to us this afternoon, chunk or nothing. And I'm not sure precisely maybe where we got the headline for this, but an interesting study on retirees and kind of how they think about spending portfolio withdrawals, right? Whether they want to take money, how they take money, when they take money. And I think it's a really interesting topic that we all deal with pretty regularly. What are you seeing?
So I was tipped off to this by I follow a blog from the Center for Research on Retirement at Boston College, and what they found was they looked at a study from Hearts and Wallets, which is an outfit that actually does research for financial institutions, and since 2010, they've been studying retirees and how they spend their money. And what they've done is they've categorized spending behavior into two things: either chunks, where retirees will take money out of their retirement savings if for necessities, for extraordinary expenses, and then the other group are considered the nothings, who withdraw little or nothing, sacrificing more of the comfort of their lifestyle because they fear that they're going to run out of money later.
And I think the fun part of this conversation is just how nicely it parallels with our own conversations. I know, there's a sensitive conversation to be had with each individual client about how much they can spend, how much they should spend, what they want to happen when they don't have the ability to spend anymore. And it's a fine line, and for every customer it's different. But Dave, I'm sure you get that every day, all day on, all right, well, I kind of want to do this, but I'm not sure if I should spend that money or not.
Hey, Kyle, it's interesting because people that work in our industry, we rarely meet spenders. I mean, if you are a hardcore spender your whole life, you never get to our office, let's face it. So we meet savers and we get to know savers. And it's hard for savers to one day wake up after they retire and turn into spenders. So I spend more time encouraging my clients to actually enjoy some of this money, reasonably and in a strategy that works with the final plan here, but not to just constantly feel like I have to just continually, stockpile this money for the event of, that something might happen someday. So, I think there's a happy medium between the all or nothing chunk spenders and the I'm not going to touch this mentality.
The conversation I have a lot with people that are just kind of getting into retirement, I've had a lot recently, is kind of just finding your level, right? Because obviously retirement's a massive life change. I don't have to say it, even though I just did. Because now you have 40 to 50 hours a week that you have to fill, and you don't know how to fill them. So a lot of people, as you said, Dave, are going to go, or the article, they're going to go gung-ho, and they're just going to spend, and they're going to travel because they do a lot more things early in retirement because they can, as opposed to later in life when they can't. But it's interesting to see the people that sometimes shoot out of the gates all of a sudden a year or two in and be like, oh, wait, we got to pull it back a little bit. We went a little, and that's kind of finding the level. As on the other side, the people that don't spend, they're like, oh no, we can do this. And so I found that article kind of interesting because the conversations we have are, you'll find what's right for you, but it's going to take a little bit because you've been working for 40, 50 years. It's not going to happen on day one that you figure it out like right away. Okay, I need this, we're good to go. It's going to take a little bit.
How much does budgeting figure into that? The clients you have who are used to budgeting or adopt a budget, and how they fit into those categories?
What's interesting, Joel, is I talked to a lot of at or near retirees who didn't operate a household budget. They didn't need to. They saved so much that they had the good habits that it wasn't necessary to be overly constrictive in their working years. There was more than enough coming in, and most of them were fairly good earners. And that is part of the conversation transitioning to retirement of, all right, in order to give you some confidence that it's okay to spend a little bit of this, maybe we should spend those last 3 months of your working life putting down on paper, here's where the money's going, right? So that you have an understanding of, well, if all I ever have to do is meet the basic needs, pay the utility bill, pay the cell phone bill, make sure that Fox News can come on the TV or whatever your program of choice is, well, okay, what's that going to cost me? And for some, it's, all right, we want to pay down the car and the house all before we retire so that list of necessities is shorter. Not necessary, but it can help to kind of streamline the conversation. But yeah, it's very much about understand where it's going so that you can then piece together, okay, what do we have to work with now besides just the basic needs? I think the most interesting part of this for me is how neatly it dovetails with a conversation we've been having for the last couple months on this generational wealth transfer. We've talked about the tens of trillions of dollars that are available to the baby boomers right now that in the span of the next 15, 20 years are going to be handed off to millennials. And what I tell clients, and I've been telling them for months now, is if you don't spend it, your kids and grandkids are going to be happy too. They don't have any reservations about spending your money. And so my encouragement is, yeah, you want to leave some to them? Great, but maybe find a way to spend it on them now. And it's not an all or nothing proposition, especially, again, if you kind of understand here are the basic needs that need to be met if you have that budget. Now you can start to branch out to that one-time big family trip to Disney or to Europe or to whatever it is you want to do, because at the end of the day, you can't take it with you. And if it's left, I'm fairly certain that it's going to get spent at some point in time. And so I think I'd much rather the people that earned it, the people that worked so hard for 30, 40 years to save up that nest egg, get to enjoy the fruits of their labor, even if it means there's a little left behind, a little less left behind for the next generation. Of course, what that looks like for every client's a little different. It's why it's so important that we kind of help you walk through, all right, here's what it's going to mean if you want to do this. Here's how we can help structure it. Here's how much you should be thinking. it isn't a one-size-fits-all, and everybody has different goals for bequest and for spending. And so I think that's where, those of us sitting at the table come in and kind of help with the conversation to say, all right, here's what you could do, here's what you can think, here's how this should work. As always, we enjoy doing the program for you. Thank you for listening. We'll talk to you again next week.
Thank you for listening to Money Talk with Bob Landis. If you have a financial question you want answered on next week's show, email it to moneytalk@landis.com. To keep informed throughout the week, visit our Money Talk page at landis.com.